I will be talking here about section E and outcomes, and looking at what that might mean. So outcomes are typically written by the local authority or all the professionals, or they gather the outcomes, I should say. They're often actually written by the professionals working with your child or maybe assessing your child. But you can inform those outcomes as well. As I said, section A is about the aspirations you have for your child or the child has for themselves, if they're able to voice that. And the professionals who are working with your child should be taking that point of view and informing that in the outcomes that they write. So they will be written alongside the advice of the professionals, such as teachers, QTVIs, and medical professionals and the educational psychologists in their report. Typically, the local authority assessment and planning officer or case officer, different places, different local authorities call them different things. They will be looking at all those outcomes and putting them in the plan. What they won't be doing is putting 50 outcomes in a plan. It is an evolving document. Outcomes will change during the course of their education, and it is not a marathon to get through. It's something to work on slowly at an age-appropriate time with the child. So, Ellen, can we go to the next slide and we'll look at the purpose of an outcome and why they're important. So the outcome, as I say, is a statement describing what your child wants to achieve. And outcomes are the intended consequence of the provision. And section E will tell you whether or not the plan is working. That's why they're important. So we've talked about this thread. You've got section B, your need. F is the provision that is required to address those barriers to your child is faced. And the outcome is actually, if we're putting that provision in place, what will my child be able to achieve that they want, is their aspiration to achieve. But it's also informed as what they educationally need as well. So hence it's professionals looking at that, because there will be outcomes maybe set around their literacy, their ability to read, their to write, how they learn, whether they need to be learning their times table if they're a very little one, or whether they're actually learning and how to use technology at a more age appropriate level. So they will be moving and changing right through the journey, through education and with that plan. So when I write section E will tell you whether or not the plan is working, I think that's a good point to remember, because people focus so much on B and F. E is important, as I said right at the beginning, because a plan can cease when either your child reaches level 3 qualifications or when it's deemed a plan is no longer required. And the plan will be reviewed annually. It's very unlikely an education healthcare plan would cease at an annual review, particularly for a child with a vision impairment, because if they require that high level of support, if you took it all away, would they actually continue to achieve? And the likelihood is no, they won't. So it's something not to panic about. However, when they're reaching 18, 19, they might not ever have that cognitive ability in some instances to achieve level 3, but we are seeing more and more local authorities wanting to move children off education and healthcare plans and into social care, adult social care. So section E, you want to keep outcomes alive and always fresh and moving if the child is achieving them. But it's your monitoring, your measure to see whether or not the school is supporting your child correctly and the child is achieving what they're setting out to achieve. All things being equal, they're doing a good job and your child has been assessed that the outcomes were appropriate to that child's needs. They weren't too unrealistic. So if we go on to the next slide, Ellen, thank you. So I mentioned this very briefly earlier. So Section E must include outcomes that are SMART, which stood for specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-bound. So we'll look at some examples. But by that, I mean the language has to be very clear about what your child will be able to do at the end of putting this provision in place. How you measure that. It can't be just a woolly statement. We talked about realistic. If the child isn't ever achieving those outcomes, were they actually realistic, achievable, and realistic when they were set? And when I say time-bound, it can't be for the life of, in some instances, it may be for the life of an education and healthcare plan. But we're hoping that they will achieve them. It might be within a term, it might be within a year, it might be within a key stage. Okay, so if we go on to the next slide, please, Ellen. I'd like you to remember that every child is an individual. So we will, in the resources, be sharing some examples of what make good outcomes for across all the needs, not just sensory and physical. We'll give you examples of what a good outcome might be in cognition and learning, social, emotional, mental health. So to get you thinking about your child's needs, because you can inform those outcomes, and local authorities will sometimes accept if you want to write your own outcome. We've had local authorities that have accepted it. Doesn't have to be driven just by teachers, by the professionals. So in this one, back to James. So we've set as you will get long-term and short-term outcomes. Some local authorities include both, some just go with outcome. But you do want to look at that, well, when is it going to be achieved? In this instance, there's a long-term outcome. So by the end of Key Stage 4, James will access his learning independently in English, history and RE. So very specific as to what the subjects are that it's deemed that he will learn independently. So that suggests he might need ongoing additional support to be accessing other core skill areas, key skills. So, you know, maybe the maths or the science. And the short-term outcome, so by the end of year 9, so much earlier, there are markers to what he will be doing. So James to use ICT to the full extent to support ease of access to the curriculum. Yeah, so he will be using the ICT and assistive technology, and James to use touch typing to write and record his work. So very measurable. You will know, get the end of year 9, if James isn't touch typing and writing his work and recording his work, then you need to be talking to the teachers. Why is that not happening? Was it realistic? Is there perhaps something going on that's not been recognised, that he has difficulties in his processing that has not been identified? Maybe that's evidence to say, I think there's a concern here. We need to look at reassessing his need. Yeah. Or it could be a marker that perhaps there's something going on that you need to look at. Is this provision right? Do we need to change the provision? Does he need more support if that's not being achieved? If we can go to the next slide. Thanks, Ellen. Thank you. Again, Section E. As Sophie said right at the beginning, you might be starting on the journey with your child and their EHCP. They might be the tiny one, they might be in nursery, preschool, they might be in primary school. The plan is very specific on sections B. It looks at, we've said, the cognition and learning, communication and interaction, social, emotional, mental health, and it looks at physical and sensory. But as your child is in secondary school, they have a responsibility to start the preparation for adulthood. And you need to be discussing the change of outcomes you expect in Section E at the annual review, and that does need to be incorporated into the plan. So there does need to be that focus, and it's important that those aspirations and what your child wants to achieve is looked at and updated in section A at those transition points as they're moving into secondary school and at the annual review, because it's a working document, it needs to be kept alive. So you need to be looking at, well, what do they want to go on and achieve? And it's different for every child is individual. So if your child is on a pathway where they're doing GCSEs and A levels, maybe they have aspirations to go on to higher education or into employment. That could be relevant to that child. It may not be. It may be they want to go on to do apprenticeships and further training that needs to be explored. But they should be working regardless of the type of educational setting that your child is in. They should be looking and exploring with that child, well, what is going to be your goals, ultimate goals when you leave education? How are you going to participate in society? Are you going to be looking at supported employment possibly? Or will you be looking at doing some unpaid volunteering work or supported voluntary work as you go through your adulthood? So there's not one size fits all. Similarly, independent living. Some children, some of us have children at home. I know, Sophie, you still do. My 3 have left. Round of applause. we have a bit of peace, but we're enjoying those moments. However, independent living is different for every child. So there may be children with more challenging needs that need that support, but there may be aspects of their life they can live independently, even if there are areas where they might need support to live and supported living, or they might need a much higher level of care. But all of that should be incorporated into section E and outcomes as your child develops and moves into adulthood. And within that, again, these are the key points that the educational provider should be looking at into your plan, and the local authority being as healthy as possible. Yeah, it's an education, health and social care plan. So it's not just about learning, it is about staying healthy, looking after both your body and your eye health. So as I say, the EHCP should give details of what the young person hopes for in terms of employment, and it should be looking at how within that plan they're going to get provide the career guidance to help the young person achieve these outcomes. So can we go to next slide, please, Ellen? Thank you. So one of the tips we think is important, how when you as a parent are using the plan, you will still have an annual review as part of the process, but you will still have parents' evening. So don't dismiss section E, use it to keep track of your child's progress. As we said, if the child isn't achieving the outcomes that were set on the plan, be asking why. And does therefore the plan need amending? Children's needs change, and it may be that your child is really struggling at school. Maybe the provision was not put in place to support them effectively. Maybe their needs are there, but the provision needs to be upped. They may have transitioned from primary school to secondary school, and the support may not have been identified. It might need to be reviewed much quicker than you think. We've had some really good plans where they've written in, or QTVI has written into a plan, that the provision should be reviewed within the first term to take account that it might need to increase because of the number of subjects that they are now doing at secondary school. So that's why I'm saying keep it alive.